Well, good evening once again. You are the faithful ones here, having gone this full 4 weeks, and I just want to say again how grateful I am that you have come. And you're a very attentive group. From the notes that I've been getting from some of you and from the conversations around, and you're really staying with it and engaged with it, and that's just thrilling to me. We've been through a lot of material, so to speak, a lot of this journey that I have, as I've called it, this journey in order to find joy for our lives and for our world as well. And so there's been a lot that we have covered, and I am so thankful that you all have stayed with it and come back, and here we are. We're in the wrap-up session tonight, so it's been a good time. I would just say, teachers always know this, that you end up learning so much in the teaching, and I have learned so much thinking through all of this in order to present it to you all. It just has been a meaningful journey for me to teach this class and to be with you and reflect on these things together. And we are hopeful that God has been served in this whole time. And that's of course, huge part of what we're doing here is an understanding of how to come closer to our Lord. And I hope some of that has happened for you. We had a question last week about would there be any chance that I could put a reading list together of some of the things I've been talking about, so you see that out there. I am sorry I got a little long. And I shouldn't have done that, I suppose, but I got going on it. And I said, well, I talked about this or I talked about that, and so maybe we should put that on there. Most of this is focused around prayer. Not all of it, but most of it is focused around prayer. And because that was the session where the question came, could you put some of the reading together? Just take a look at it, do some searching around about the various titles, or a title that might be appealing to you. I've tried to write just a little note on each one of them. About my reflections on them, but I hope you enjoy that. I hope it turns out to be meaningful to you in some kind of way. So here we go. I'm calling this class, this session, Living Joyfully. So if we find joy, then we must live it. We want to live it. We want to live out our joy. I was telling Pat earlier, I'm not sure that painting is the most appropriate thing for church, but I absolutely love the painting. It's Renoir, as many of you may know, but this is living joyfully. These folks, the way this is portrayed, I just love the joy that comes out of this painting and this gathering of people. A kind of community of joy, and that's what we're after, and those are some of the kinds of things that we will be looking at tonight. I want to loop back on a few things where we were ending last time, because I had to get in a little bit of a rush, and I left some things out. I left a major piece out that I'm going to start with. It works perfectly, though. It's not going to be repetitious. It's just going to lead us into what we want to do tonight. But I want to go back and look at this painting. We talked about this last week. This is Malaise Angeles, and it was in 1857. And I thought it was a very tender portrayal, capturing this couple out working in the fields. The day is finished. The day of work is finished, and they bow in prayer. And in thanksgiving, we would assume, in gratitude for life and for their lives and for the work they have to do and for the day and for each other. I mean, we can read so much into this, and we can, because the artist has allowed us to to witness this and experience in the tenderness that he has put into painting the painting. I love it. But I want to give you a quote that I didn't use last week, and it tells us a lot about the kind of thing that we have been discussing, about two narratives. You remember we talked about this notion of two narratives. There's a secular narrative which we are surrounded with, and then there is a Christian narrative which is sometimes bumping up against the secular narrative. But listen to this quote. There is, however, this is really stupid, I'll tell you, and it's some sophisticated academic here is going to give us the word on this painting. But she says, there is, however, no religious message to this painting. Mallet was simply concerned with portraying a ritualized moment of meditation taking place as dusk rolls in. And I'm going, oh, please. There's a narrative driving this, that this woman feels obligated, that she's got to dismiss anything. This is not about prayer. I mean, who prays anymore? I mean, isn't that the feeling of this quote? It's just ridiculous. So the painting is in the narrative we have been claiming that there is a reason to pray, that there is value in prayer, that there is a gesture of great thanksgiving in prayer. All of those things, I think, are there. And she says, oh, well, this is not about prayer. I mean, nobody prays anymore. Ian McEwan, some of you may know him, a contemporary novelist, British, in his novel on Chesil Beach. He has a character who sort of gleefully proclaims, I am grateful to live at a time when religion has generally faded into insignificance. And so there we go. So there's the narrative pushing against our notions of prayer. Our pursuit of, as we were talking last time, the practice of prayer, entering into the life of prayer, and we've got a whole culture out there saying it's all just descended into insignificance. And I say, really, this is what we're up against, folks, as we take this journey of joy, of finding joy. Joy has faded into insignificance along with prayer, along with faith, right? I mean, it all comes together. It all fits together, it seems to me, that we have to hear this voice that's saying what you're doing, what you believe, what you're pursuing, even though it's so deeply meaningful to us, has faded into insignificance. Well, as we ended our session last week, we had one of our class members, he's here tonight, ask a very important question, and a question that we want to address tonight. And that is, it's the question of what do we do with suffering? As in this pursuit of joy, in the pursuit of life of prayer, as we talked last week, as we were working on that notion last week, what then do we do about suffering? How then do we understand suffering? How in the world can we expect to find joy, as we've been talking, or find a practice of prayer when there is so much suffering in the world? The question is age-old. It has been around forever. I think, in fact, you can almost say, you can go back to the beginnings, the story of creation. God is creating his world joyfully, full of joy, full of the goodness of the Lord in this process, in the creation, and he says, it is very good. What we are doing, creation is very good. And then, of course, immediately, the goodness of creation is challenged because human beings began to murder each other. So violence and hatred and division, all of those things we live with today, so much enters into the story almost immediately. And here is this God of joy, this God who is creating something very good, something very good. And then it all gets disrupted, violently disrupted. And then, so we're left with the question, there's the whole story. And we're left with the question, in this world that God created very good, what do we do with suffering? I think this is one of the big questions, one of the tough questions as Pastor Joint is engaging us in this series called Addressing the Tough Issues, the big questions. This is one of them. This is at the forever has been one of the most perplexing and difficult questions for Christians to answer. Now, I did this a little reluctantly, but this is N.T. Wright, one of the great, really truly renowned scholars, New Testament scholar focused mostly, but the whole scriptures, the Bible, one of the great scholars of our time. That's me. I don't know about this picture where looks like I'm sort of pontificating. I'm sort of holding forth, and there's N.T. Wright listening dutifully, right? I mean, that's a little silly. But by the way, his purple shirt is the bishop's shirt of the Anglican Church, of the Church of England. He was the Bishop of Durham at this time. He was, in my opinion, was being looked at, thought about as the next Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church. He chose, as many of you may know about him, he chose to go back to academic life, to his scholarship, to research, and to teaching the scriptures. He decided that the administrative thing, all of the turmoil within the church would pull him away from what he felt his deepest calling was, and that is scholarship and writing, and he's prolific. But by the way, I would encourage you to go online and Google him and take a look at these things that he's putting out now. He's gone quite extensively putting things out online. I'm following a weekly little devotional that he does in his study, which he begins, by the way, well, let's begin this after we have a cup of tea. And so it's got this kind of hominess to it, you know, it's just really wonderful. And then he teaches on a passage of Scripture each week. I love it. It's very, very beautiful. So anyway, but N.T. Wright, looking at this question that we're involved with, says, we are not told through the Scriptures, we are not told, at least in any way that satisfies our puzzled questioning, how and why there is radical evil within God's wonderful, beautiful, and essentially good creation. That sort of says it, sort of asks that question forcefully, saying we're just not told. We don't have the answers, at least not in ways that really are very satisfying to us. He goes on to say, one day I think we shall find out. I like the humility of that, by the way. He says, one day I think we shall find out why God has allowed this evil. But I believe we are incapable of understanding it at the moment. And so I go, wow, to that. Here I am trying to stand up here and say a few things about how it is we deal with suffering as we're on this journey to find joy, and N.T. Wright is backing away from it or saying that, man, we just don't know. This is something that just feels almost beyond understanding. So I think we should not, though, back away from it. We should not say, okay, well, it's kind of a mystery. It's deeply perplexing. Should we just step aside and just let it go? I think not. I think we need to dig in. I think we need to wrestle with it. I think Pastor Joint is absolutely right with this series about asking the tough questions. When the tough questions come up, they come up for all of us. This question of suffering always is a part of our thinking. We see it all over the world, and we witness it, and we say, what do we do with that? How do we deal with it? And so the tendency may be, well, I can't, if N.T. Wright can't figure it out, I can't figure it out. So, but we're going to dive in. We're going to try it. Ivan Karamazov, some of you may know, one of the main characters in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, by the way, which I think is one of the greatest novels ever written. In any case, he has this long discussion with his younger brother, much more innocent and kind. He was even thinking about going into a monastery, the younger brother, Alyosha. And so Ivan is the sophisticated intellectual throughout the novel. And what does he do? He has this long discourse with Alyosha that how can one possibly believe in God if only one child suffers at the hands of an adult? That's Ivan's question, big question. He goes on to catalog the most horrifying list of these awful things done to children. And they're just horrifying. They're numbing. And he ends it by saying, how, with all of that going on, how is it that I can still believe in God? I want to quote from one of the new atheists, Bart Ehrman. He, though he is one of the new atheists, by the way, persists in holding a position at the University of North Carolina as a New Testament scholar. I don't know quite how that comes together. But he relishes, some of you may know Ehrman's work, he relishes in telling the story how he lost his faith. And he lost his faith. He relishes in it. By the way, he was a graduate of Wheaton College. We've got some Wheaton graduates here today, and then a PhD from Princeton Seminary, and yet he still loves to tell the story of how he lost his faith and sort of revels in that. But here's what he says: suffering increasingly became a problem for me and my faith. How can one explain all the pain and misery in the world if God, the creator and a redeemer of all, is sovereign over it, exercising his will both on grand scheme and in daily workings of our lives? Why, I ask, is there such rampant starvation in the world? Why are there droughts, epidemics, hurricanes, earthquakes? If God answers prayer, why didn't he answer the prayers of the faithful Jews during the Holocaust, or of the faithful Christians who suffered torment and death at the hands of the Nazis? If God is concerned to answer my little prayers about my daily life, why didn't he answer mine and other big prayers when millions were being slaughtered in Cambodia? When a mudslide killed 30,000 Colombians in their sleep in a matter of minutes, when disasters of all kinds caused by humans and by nature happens in the world. Exhausts you. I mean, it takes your breath away. It's hard questioning. It is hard noticing. Although N.T. Wright, in an encounter with Bart Ehrman, challenges him and says, oh, come on now. So what are you applying? That because I am a faithful Christian, moving on in my faith, growing in my faith, I don't notice these things? It's as if he has a sort of self-righteous kind of sense about this all as he names off all of the suffering going on in the world. But it's important for us to recognize and important for us to listen to it. That's my point here. None other than C.S. Lewis, in his marvelous book, The Problem of Pain, by the way, without very much self-righteous pontificating, to be sure, he asks just this same question. If God were good, he would wish to make his creatures perfectly happy. And if God were almighty, he would be able to do what he wished. But the creatures are not happy. Therefore, God lacks either goodness or power, or both. These are the first words in his book, The Problem of Pain. C.S. Lewis I would assure you, as I'm sure you would be aware, I assure you, C.S. Lewis spends the rest of the book answering the question of the problem of pain. So how do we answer these questions? Let's think about it together. I'm going to dive into some stuff here. Hold on, because in a hope that I can, as we go, what do I want to say? Explain it to the best of my ability to understand it, but we're going to wade in. So buckle up and let's move through some of these attempts to answer. How do I answer? I've been asking that question of myself. The problem of pain, the problem of suffering. We are all, at all times, all of the time, we are faced with the problem of pain. Even in our own lives we are, or among our loved ones, or as we look around the world, we're faced with it. And so we've got to take a stab at some answers, it seems to me. So let's tackle the problem. Let's dive in. We might go back to C.S. Lewis again in the very book that I just quoted from, where he asks the question about the problem, to listen to his approach to it. He says this. This is a key response, by the way, and I like it, and I find others making the similar kind of response. There would be no problem of pain unless, side by side with our daily experience of this painful world, we had received what we think a good assurance that ultimate reality is righteous and loving. Right? So pain would not be pain if we didn't also see that there was goodness, if it didn't come side by side with the reality that we see all around us, that there is justice and goodness and love and joy. We see those all around us. Pain then becomes pain as we compare to the positive side. If we don't have an ultimate contrast to pain, then we have to let pain be the final answer. Right? Are you getting that? If we don't really see, feel, understand a contrast to pain, an alternative to pain, something good, then it seems to me we've got to let go and say, well, pain gets the final answer. Now, N.T. Wright, back to N.T. Wright again, he went toe-to-toe with Bart Ehrman on an online debate. I encourage you to search it out and look at it and see these two scholars go at it. It is a marvelous discussion of just the questions we are discussing. And here's what he says, similar to Lewis, by the way, so we're still on this point that we see goodness in the world, so pain then becomes more painful. We experience pain then as a reality, but not necessarily the final answer, okay? So here's N.T. Wright. If there is only suffering and very little any goodness in our world and in our lives, why, granted your view of the world, he's talking to Bart Bart Ehrman, why granted your view that suffering is everything, why granted your view should we bother? Why not eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, and thank our lucky stars we can do so. The other side of the coin of the problem of evil, after all, is the problem of the good. If there is no God, no good and wise creator, why is there an impulse to do justice, mercy so deep within us? Why is there beauty, love, laughter, friendship, joy? Well, we've got to ask that question at the same time we ask the question, why is there suffering, right? Why is there joy? And this puts for us then powerful sense of tension. By the way, this whole notion that Ehrman is arguing is Epicurean. Some of you may know that coming out of Greek philosophy, coming into Roman philosophy through the great Lucretius, writing a century before Christ. And the position there is just what Wright is accusing Ehrman of, and that is, if everything is evil, if there is no God, just enjoy yourself. Just forget it. You're carrying too much guilt around. You're carrying too much frustration. If there is no God, there is no goodness, just go with it. And just find all of the pleasure that you can in life. That's the Epicurean position. But this won't do for Christians. As we turn to the grand biblical story, we find God's children waiting with hope and expectation. One day, God will come and make things right. That's the big assertion in the face of suffering. One day, even in our own lives, even in a moment of suffering for ourselves, but one in the grand story, one day, God will come and make things right. That's the big promise. I want to turn to a quotation from G.K. Chesterton. Isn't that a great photograph? I love that. In his study. And by the way, I had Apostle Paul on my little reading list. I took a Rembrandt painting of Apostle Paul in his study, working and reading and so forth. I love learning, and this is an affirmation of learning, but G.K. Chesterton represents this so well. But he's written now follow me so you get the thrust of this quote. He's written this fabulous little, not a very big book, but this little biography of St. Thomas Aquinas. Some of you may know Aquinas well. I struggle with him. He is very difficult to read. His big books are massive, but he is hugely influential in theological, philosophical world for Christians. And so Chesterton, a contemporary of C.S. Lewis, by the way, a brilliant writer, wonderful writer, by the way, witty always. But he says, this is about Aquinas now. He's writing about Aquinas. He says, contrary to all the wheels and whirlpools of the earth, all the wheels and the whirlpools of the earth going on around us, I like the language there, contrary to that stands St. Thomas, vitally and vividly alone, declaring that life is a living story. I love this. I just love it. To follow this expression. Aquinas, there he is. He's in the muck with us. Chesterton is saying. He's down there with us. He understands it all. He understands the workings of the world. He understands that there's suffering in the world. But vitally and vividly alone, he declares that life is a living story with a great beginning and a great close. Rooted. Now listen to this. This is the position. This is the central statement of our faith that then addresses the question of pain, the question of suffering. It's a living story with a great beginning and a great close, rooted in the primeval joy of God and finding its fruition in the final happiness of humility. I hope you followed that. Okay, this is Chesterton talking about Aquinas. Maybe hard to really grasp that language, but we are part of a living story with a great beginning and a great close. That's what the biblical narrative gives us, all of this. But it's all rooted in God's primeval joy. Fundamental, essential, central joy. God is a God of joy. And finding its fruition in the final happiness of humanity. Aquinas said somewhere that no man or woman can live without joy. So we come closer to God to find the center of our story, this anchor of our story. At the center is the God of joy who wants happiness for all of humanity. We're beginning to address the question of suffering. So the Christian story proposes an alternative narrative to our view of suffering. Right? I mean, that's what we're saying. We see goodness everywhere. This changes our view of suffering. Evil doesn't have the final say, right? The primeval joy of God trumps the power of human suffering. That's the Christian story. Now listen, this is the Christian narrative up against this narrative that presses us against us, the secular narrative that says all of this is nonsense. All of this, as we were talking about the notion of prayer, pushing against us with skepticism, cynicism about all of this. But the Christian story pushes back and says, no, wait a minute. This is true. The God of joy is at the center of it all. This is true. And what we are faced with then is a choice. We have to make a choice between those narratives. We've been saying that all along. We have then to make a choice. But I want to propose another angle to this. It's really saying the same thing, but it's another angle to it. I ran into this in my early morning reading several weeks ago. It just blew me away. I was reading actually from The Way of the Heart, Henry Nouwen's wonderful book on prayer, and I ran into this passage. I'm going to open it up for you because I think it is profound. It was for me. It shook me to the core. So we're dealing with suffering. We're wrestling with it in our lives and in our world. We see it everywhere around us. And here is an answer in prayer, says Nouwen. So he says all of those who have become part of our lives are led into the healing presence of God and touched by Him in the center of our being. This is as we pray, he's saying. Prayer is this powerful. That we are in prayer and we bring all of the suffering of those around us into our hearts as we grow closer to God's heart. Powerful. We are speaking here about a mystery, Nouwen says, for which words are inadequate. It is the mystery that the heart, our hearts, transformed by God into His own heart. There we find a heart large enough to embrace the entire universe. Wow. I'm blown away by that. I think as simple as sitting in our prayer chairs, as we come closer to the heart of God, we then are able to absorb all of the suffering of the world into our hearts where God is living, and we are released of the burden. Through prayer, he says, yes, through prayer, we can carry in our heart all human pain and sorrow, all conflicts and agonies, all torture and war, all hunger, loneliness, and misery, not because of some great psychological or emotional capacity on our part, but because God's heart has become one with ours. Do you feel the relief, the release that God is going to carry this burden? I think this is where so much of our anxiety comes from, so much of our looking around and feeling the stress of the world, and somehow in this notion that if we come close to God's heart, our heart is able to take in the pain and the suffering because God's heart is huge. It can absorb the whole the whole universe. Jesus invites us to accept his burden, which is the burden of the whole world, a burden that includes human suffering in all times and all places. But this divine burden is light, says Jesus, and we carry it when our heart has been transformed into the gentle and humble heart of our Lord. My notes say here, this just rocks me to the core. I'm relieved. Jesus says, give me your burden. I'll carry it. And this is the burden of suffering that he absorbs. And we come close to his heart, the big heart of God, and we are released. Not that we stop caring, no way. We continue to notice and we continue to care. We continue to love those around us who are suffering. We do everything. We reach out, we show love, we show concern, all of that. But we're relieved of the burden, of the stress of carrying that suffering. So, could there be a more compelling narrative for human hope than that? I'm convinced, with so many other people writing these days and thinking about these things, that we're in a moment of civilizational decline. I've talked about that before. The ever-wise Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who died just a couple of years ago, points out that the results of civilizational decline lie all around us. The collapse of marriage, the fracturing of the family, the fraying of the social bond, the partisanship of politics at a time when national interest demands something larger, the loss of public trust in public institution, the buildup of debt whose burden will fall on future generations, and the failure of a shared morality to lift us out of the morass of individualism, hedonism, consumerism, and relativism. We know these things, and yet we seem collectively powerless to move beyond. So I want to shift now, because Sacks goes on to say we know all of that. We hear all of that. We think about all of that. We feel all of that. We carry the stress of all of that, of recognizing those things. And the question then, Sacks says, well, what do we do? Can we stand in the way of civilizational decline? And he says we must offer a more compelling ground of human hope than the new barbarisms, secular and religious both. So the more compelling ground, the more compelling narrative of human hope is what we're looking for as we conclude our series. First, we must offer up a new narrative for human flourishing found in Jesus Christ, the one who carries the burden of suffering. Okay, so back to our early first session, that's the foundational, that's the presupposition we ground ourselves on, out of which everything else flows. As we are defining, expressing, living a compelling alternative to this civilizational decline. Secondly, we offer another vision for simply living joyfully. And that's where I wanted to locate us tonight. If we find joy, then the challenge is to live joyfully. And that can make all the difference. That is presenting a compelling alternative to civilizational decline. Live joyfully. Ground it all in Jesus Christ to begin with, and then live joyfully. N.T. Wright says, the story of those, here's this alternative, the story of those who, following Jesus, make his deal with evil project a reality in and through their own lives. That's why the early church spread, not by thumping dogmas into people's heads, but by living in a way which brought healing and hope. In his book, After You Believe, Why Christian Character Matters, Wright says, what the disciples discovered in Jesus was a way of being human which nobody had ever imagined before. This is a way of generosity and forgiveness, a way of self-emptying, and a determination to put everyone else's needs first. It was the way of humility, charity, patience, and chastity, something unthinkable as virtues to the Greeks. So that's the alternative. It is living joyfully, finding joy in Christ, and then living out joy. This is the powerful alternative statement of the alternative. I want to turn now to one of the greatest chapters in the Bible, I believe, one of the greatest statements ever made about human character, about how to grow into joyful lives, about how to become joyful people in Colossians. Colossians, it's starting in chapter 2 here with this first quote. But let's take a look at this. Now, this is a great passage, and this is, I mean, we need to read this over and over again. We need the discipline of learning how to live this way, how to take on this articulation of what it means to live joyfully, about how it is we develop character that can address the suffering in our world, the difficulties of our world. And so Paul says, therefore, since you have accepted Christ Jesus as Lord, live in union with him. This goes back to our prayer, discussion of prayer. How do we do that? We come into an encounter with Jesus every day. Okay, just so it's this grounding that happens in the practice of prayer. Be rooted in him. Be built in him. Grow strong in the faith as if you were taught, as you were taught. Let your hearts overflow with thankfulness. Be on your guard. Let no one capture your minds and with hollow and delusive speculations based on traditions of human teaching and centered on the elemental spirits of the universe and not on Christ. So it's Christ first. Once again, we come back to our starting point. It is Christ first. Come close to him. And then he goes on in just one of the most extraordinary passages ever written. Just follow me here. Let me read this. So what does this look like? If we are coming close to Jesus, if we are being transformed in that relationship, if prayer is changing us as we believe it can, what then do you do? How then do we live? And Paul says, put on then garments that suit God's chosen and beloved people. Put them on. I mean, put on the clothes, just as if you would pull out a certain church shirt in the morning. Put on. You practice it. Think about it. Reflect on it. Read about it. Pray about it. Put on these garments that suit God's chosen and beloved people. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. It's a list that changes us completely. If we can live this way, our world would change. If we could live this, we will change. Live with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Be tolerant with one another and forgiving. If any of you has cause of complaint, you must forgive as the Lord forgave you. Finally, to bind everything together and complete the whole, there must be love. Let Christ's peace be arbiter in your decisions, the peace to which you were called as members of a single body. Always be thankful. Let the gospel of Christ dwell among you in all its richness. Teach and instruct one another with all the wisdom it gives you. With psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, sing from the heart in gratitude to God. Let every word and action, everything you do, be in the name of the Lord Jesus, and give thanks through him to God the Father. What a statement. What a statement. What a grounding, foundational kind of statement of how to live joyfully. It starts with Christ. It starts with coming into an encounter with Christ. It comes through prayer, through being transformed in prayer and a prayer life. Worship, of course, but we've been talking about this prayer notion of prayer, doing this, coming and being transformed, and then put on the garments, put on a life that suits God's chosen people: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. I tell you what, you run into these people. They are people that are all around us. They're people in our church. They're people in our organizations, at our work, people in our families who do this, who have these kind of characteristics, these kind of traits, who through prayer, again, are transformed to become people of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It's really quite extraordinary. Well, I'm debating about skipping over something in order to allow some questions and comments. Here's a great passage that I love. This is from Jeremiah. And coming out of exile, he says, let me read it just briefly, quickly. They will come with shouts of joy to Zion's heights, radiant at the bounty of the Lord. The grain, the new wine, the oil, the young flock and the herd. They will be like a well-watered garden and never languish again. Girls will then dance for joy, and men young and old will rejoice. I shall turn their grief into gladness, comfort them, and give them joy after sorrow. What a promise. What a promise. What a promise to claim. After exile, after knowing suffering. You see the top quote up there, which precedes this one, and that is that God's people have rejected their God, a source of the living water, and they have hewn out for themselves cisterns, cracked cisterns, which hold no water. Is that the way we want to live? By the way, many of our modern writers have talked about living in a wasteland. T.S. Eliot, his great poem, quite an important poem called The Wasteland, talks about this sense of dryness. We have created, in this godless world, we've created a wasteland, a sense of dryness, and Jeremiah is way ahead of him. We are holding these cisterns, cracked cisterns that dripping. The water is living water is dribbling out. So come back and come back with shouts of joy. Come back radiant over the bounty of the Lord. Well, what have we learned? Let me go through this. This is a kind of summary, and then we'll be finished for the evening. And if you have any comments, you'll have a chance to do that. So we began on the first session saying that joy begins by coming closer to Jesus every day. So we continue to try to emphasize that. That's the conviction here, that joy comes from coming closer to Jesus. I'm quoting here from that hymn, familiar to so many of you, I'm sure. There is a place of quiet rest near to the heart of God. There is a place of full release near to the heart of God, a place where all is joy and peace near to the heart of God. That's our starting place, near to the heart of God, right? All is joy and peace. We can spend a lot of time talking about our stress and our anxiety, and so we look around the world and we see it everywhere, and we feel it in our own lives. So this is a place near to the heart of God. That's a great Rembrandt painting on Simeon, who was presented the baby Jesus, and he's full of joy. He experiences joy. So then we talked at length about having to choose between two narratives. It doesn't look like it's coming out very well. This is that great Hopper painting that I've spent a lot of time on, but we've got to choose. We've got to make a choice between the two narratives. One of them a godless narrative, one of them that is airbrush God out of existence, off to the margins. And we get emptiness and we get loneliness. This is what this painting has talked to me about. Or we can take this other one where the heavens declare his glory. And this is a Van Gogh painting, Starry Night. And this offers joy, it seems to me. The narrative is portrayed by these two paintings now, as we were saying, and we're looking at the two of them and comparing and saying, which one do we choose? Can we choose this one? Because there we will find joy. And then thirdly, we talked about finding joy in the little things. We talked about, we looked at various pieces of poetry that I happen to love and enjoy. But find joy in the little things in our lives, maybe like slicing peaches. Maybe like the miracle of just fixing dinner. You may remember Donald Hall's poem. Maybe like those frogs amiably ambling down the road. Maybe it's like the backflip of the great blue heron out over the river just for the joy of it, says Wendell-Berry. Maybe it's the glory of the Lord breaking into the restroom at McDonald's in Nogales. These are the little things. We notice the little things. We pay attention to the little, and we find joy. We can find joy in those little things. I think this is the one where I began with that arousing piece of music. I've found joy in my heart. You know, such a beautiful piece, and such a statement of what this third one was. So it all begins in the prayer chair. We talked at length about this. I've become so convicted and convinced about the life of prayer and the value of the life of prayer, and that finally, almost suddenly, you find yourself being a different person through the practice of prayer. And as we come closer to God, we find joy in prayer. Prayer changes everything. And I've become convinced that prayer can change the world, can stand in the way of civilizational decline. So finally, we talked about sowing seeds, that we sow seeds in tears, says the psalmist. But then joy comes in the morning. And there we are, coming home, bringing in the sheaves, singing our songs of joy. Mysteriously, our grief turns into gladness, our joy turns into songs, our sorrow turns into songs of joy. That's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, this is where what we're even talking about tonight is going out sowing our seeds. We go out in tears and we come home in singing songs of joy. That's the hope. That's the vision. That's the expectation. And then finally, there's our painting we started with. We live joyfully. We show the world a better way through our joyful lives. Our joyful lives begin the revolution, I think. I've been looking for that kind of language revival, another way of talking about it. Our joy will change our lives. Our joy will change the world. And finally, we end by saying, finding joy is a big deal. Don't you think? Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Well, we've got a few minutes here. If anybody would like to make a statement, we've got a mic down there, or you could speak up loudly, or you could speak in the aisleway as we gather, as we end. And no need to speak out if you don't have it coming, but any kind of comments. David.
Bill, I just want to thank you very much for all you've done presenting to us. It's been very meaningful to me and been changing to me. Thank you very much.
Great, brother. Thank you. Thank you. That's my dear brother, by the way, David Eaton, and from whom I have learned so much in my lifetime. I looked up to him so much that I didn't think too highly of myself sometimes, you know. I mean, he's a force in my life. So thank you, David, for that. So any other comments or, yes, Gary?
Phil, I'm just so impressed with the joy in your life.
Yeah.
As you teach it, as I've gotten to know you and Sharon and being around you,
Yeah.
you are a living joy.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. That's very meaningful to me. And as you know, the first night I was saying, I think we're in a church that is full of joy, joyful people. I really believe that, by the way. We've been in a number of churches, and I think there is a lot of joy here. And I also made the statement that I think our pastor joint preaches out of a heart of joy. I had a chance to tell Julia that a little bit earlier, and I just think it's true. But thank you for that comment. I hope and pray that that is the case. If we think that a joyful life can make a difference, again, both in our own lives, living joy, but if we think that a joyful life can make a difference in the lives of others, then we got to live it, and we've got to show it. And that's what we were trying to talk about tonight. Any other comment, question? Okay. Well, thank you once again. Thank you very much for being here, being so attentive, and keep thinking about these things. You've got a lot to read here. A lifetime of reading out ahead, but anyway, pick up some of those things and follow this journey of finding joy. God bless you.